Okay, a reading according to the gospel according to Joey Reynolds. Let a smile be your umbrella, but don't get a mouthful of rain. This is the Joey Reynolds story as read by Joey Reynolds and interrupted by Joey Reynolds, interpreted by Joey Reynolds, and I've got Joey coming out the asshole. I've had enough. I've heard, am I fixing my blouse? This is radio. Why am I wearing a blouse? Well, because Ellen DeGeneres is wearing pants. That's what, what are you talking about? All right, here we go. Chapter 7. Most of the country's going chapter 11, and I'm going chapter 7 on this thing. Oh, boy. Well, it's a long one. That's why most women like me. Anyway, Reynolds Rap. I trust in God, but I tie my camel. That's an old Arab saying. These days, I'm doing what I really love to do on radio, talking. Well, actually, I'm doing it on the internet now and on the various platforms. But this, when it was written 20 years ago on the anniversary, I'm not spinning a bunch of records dictated by the corporate playlist. Nothing's changed. They still do it. It's Sony, EMI, Warner Brothers. They have the corner on the market because they have the money and the publishing, and they dictate all the terms too. Well, I'm just a personality, being myself, hanging out with a bunch of friends after midnight on the radio. That's what I was doing back then on WOR. I didn't never know where the show was going, but it's exciting. It got a stream of consciousness style to it. And I used to get busted for easygoing style. When I had a top 40 countdown show at WKWK in Wheeling, West Virginia, I was supposed to play song number 40 backwards, like Casey Kasem, all the way down to number 1. Between 3 and 6 every afternoon on the radio. Invariably, I would start with number 40 at 3 o'clock. Invariably at 6, I would say, okay, stay tuned for the top 4 or 5 with Bill Quay, because I was always talking and taking too much time. The next guy would have to play the songs that I couldn't squeeze in because I wanted to chat. Station manager, WMCA, they gave me the name. Robert Strauss ran for office in New York State as a senator. He bought WMCA, WBNY in Buffalo, Wavy in Albany. He had 3 stations. He was wanting to cover the state on radio. And the WMCA good guys, they named me and moved me from the Buffalo station, WBNY, to WMCA in New York. I was there for 1 hour. The general manager of the station walked in after my 1 hour show, and he said, why don't you try doing a 1 hour show instead of 6 10-minute shows? See, I was all over the place like I am now. I didn't have the continuity he was looking for. You know, they're all formatted. But to me, just announcing records was boring. It wasn't doing anything. Living my life through recording artists was not my goal. I got on the air so that I could probably have girls and get laid. But, you know, the thing is that you don't want to have your life through celebrities. I still am that way. I mean, the late night shows on television, I wouldn't be doing them the way they're doing them because I wouldn't want to sit there and talk about all these other guys and their movies. I want to talk about me. Well, yeah, I'm self-centered, and that's what makes it. Well, so is Rush Limbaugh and those guys. You know, they're self-centered. I thought one of the things that I wanted to do with my life, I'm doing right now, which is to just have fun and tell everybody like it is. That's all, and be myself, be natural. The overnight talk show at WOR afforded me that opportunity with Rick Buckley. He was the last of the red hot broadcasters. His father started WNEW in New York years ago with the first disc jockey was Martin Block. And then Rick Buckley took over the station here years later. And the only difference was Rick Buckley, stations were financed by a bank. His father paid cash. So it was a different era. Anyway, I got a rare freedom on the air in New York on WOR. I could do anything I wanted to do as long as I didn't violate any of the laws of the land, none of the FCC rules. In those days, we had a good FCC. We had a guy who was the commissioner who actually was in broadcasting. This guy now, I don't think he knows where the men's room is. But very few DJs on commercial radio have that kind of freedom right now. And I was not a DJ anyway. I became a talk show host when I was in Denver and I made the turn. I worked for General Electric 3 times, as you probably know from hearing my book. Howard Stern had, he got famous with everything ending in the crotch. So he had to stay in the crotch or he would lose his audience. I mean, that's what he was known for. Rush Limbaugh had to make fun of the Democrats. He was known for that. Dr. Laura got to sit there and listen to everybody's whining. She was known for that. These folks don't have freedom. They became imprisoned by their narrow formats, in my opinion, until they got really famous enough to where they didn't have to listen to anybody's programming. You know the difference between prison and jail? I just learned this the other day. I had never known there was a difference. Jail is a place you stay until the matter is resolved. Prison is where you go to get the result of your crime. There are a lot of words that we just assume mean the same thing. We never stop to think about them, like envy and jealousy. Envy is wanting something that someone else has. Jealousy is not wanting that person to have it. But you can't take away another person's successes, no matter how jealous you are or envious. Jealousy will only thwart your own success. I remember I heard some young comedian put down Joan Rivers, who was on the air before me at WOR. She was on earlier. This girl was making fun of Joan's comedy style, but she was obviously jealous of Joan. And think about it, Joan was the first female host of The Tonight Show. What are they going to do? Take that away from her? She had the first live show on Fox television. Going to take that away from her? She was one of the first of the female breakthrough comics, and you can't take those accomplishments away. Joan and I used to talk. She said, you know, you made it to the top. You're at the top. You enjoy it. Everything else is going to be cream on the cake right now. Cheesecake. What talk radio does better than TV and movies is create a sense of intimacy between the host and the audience. Radio can be a constant companion, a real close friend. Maybe you can get more intimate on the phone, talking about your mother, or the internet chat room, communicating with some fat guy posing as a lesbian. There's no intimacy in that, I suppose. Other media spend zillions of dollars and hours of research to figure out how to get the intimacy that a radio show is capable of. There's no intimacy on TV because it was built across the room anyway when we first got the sets. You don't know anything about Jay Leno, who was a host at the time when I wrote this book, except that he collects cars, which he still does. You know, Letterman gets stalked, and Larry King had 100 wives, and Conan O'Brien wrote for The Simpsons. About all you know about these guys, you know. They're in your life at least an hour every day or night if you watch them, yet you know nothing about these hooligans. Not that radio is always intimate. If a DJ is a puker on the air, like, hey everybody, welcome to 5 in a row, there's no intimacy in that for sure. But if a DJ gets on the air with a caller who says, hey, you know, I'm really in trouble and I'm hurting, I don't know what to do about this, but here's what I've done so far. You can sit there by your radio all night. It'll have you gripped like no film or sitcom. Tragedies always are, when they're real, it works on the radio. And radios are a parasite anyway. It lives off of everybody else's work, but that's a whole other chapter. Now, another example here, the comedian Robert Schimmel was one of my favorites. He was on my show. I first saw him in San Francisco doing stand-up comedy, my favorite comic. And Eddie Brill also, who's his roommate for a number of times. Eddie and he were best of friends. Eddie was the warm-up guy for David Letterman, still with us and still very funny. When having Schimmel on the show, I didn't want him to recite his act on my show. I wanted the audience to get to know him as a human being. So apart from his act, he told a story about his son who was 12 years old when he died of leukemia. His son had a going away talk with dad in the car one day, and they were in Arizona, I think, where they lived. And the boy said, Dad, I'm sorry, I'm dying because I'm sad to leave you. And Robert pulled the car over and broke down and cried. And he shared this on my show. It was a very touching moment. On the other hand, bringing back to radio as a parasite, it does not create anything on its own these days. It uses other people's music, their stories, their phone calls, someone else's news, networks, syndication to entertain its audience. The most boring, deadbeat, bottom of the totem pole format of all the entertainment media. It's a vast wasteland. It's greedy and a bloodsucker, except for my show, of course. What's more, radio is manipulated by program directors, consultants, and pimps and thieves who are scared, and by managers who don't want to lose their jobs. Now these days by stockholders. They don't care. They fire people just to make money. The people are the first things to go anymore. The business is fear-based. These guys are always juggling around the format to make ratings. They live and die by the numbers. But now the ratings are not so much the important thing. For advertising agencies are not buying just by demographic. They're buying now by performance. So something has to already be working. And not everybody understands this, but national advertising is at a standstill on local radio because nobody listens to local radio the way they used to. Today, choosing records to play on the air is a science. It used to be an art. Stations today play the songs that are selling, and sales are researched. Used to be if you buy records based on what the DJ thought was good, then it would fly. Now it's just the record company force-feeding songs to program directors and music directors. DJs are not making the hits anymore. The listeners aren't making the hits. The record companies are dictating the hits, even with Spotify. That's owned by a conglomerate of people. They sit there and they give you 100 records to choose from, so they already chose 100 things they want. This is their way of controlling the board. Record companies are dictating the hits all the time. They target the least discerning, most impressionable listeners. The young pre-millennials now, what we call the G set, the G zone, teeny boppers, we used to call them. We did not have the attention span to listen to a DJ for more than 10 seconds. It wasn't in the cards. You know what I think killed the art of being a DJ? What did in the great personalities back in the early days of rock, it was the Beatles. They got bigger than the jocks. And you didn't need us anymore. The jocks weren't necessary anymore. So up until then, a guy walked into a room, played his records, and then you listened to his rap. Nowadays, every station is playing the same 10 songs on that particular format, and it burns out because you're listening to one station all the time for the one thing, and enough already. There's no cross-pollination easily. So between the songs and the commercials, the DJ has about 10 seconds to cultivate a relationship with the audience, to express his or her personality. As a result, there's nobody to MC the songs today, so once again, the hits have to appeal to the least sophisticated listeners, which is kids, That's okay, nothing wrong with that. They're on video games anyway. They're not listening to the radio like they used to. It's high time top 40 radio stations did a morning show with a real DJ who could MC the show instead of doing shtick all the way through the morning rush. People over 25 need someone to say, hey, here's such and such an artist, give the name of the person. Or the band or the group. This is what we're all about. And you need a Casey Kasem in the morning. Somebody who could give the older listeners a libretto so they can figure out what the hell the music is about. No 40-year-old plus who has been listening to Rush or Larry King can switch to a music station and know what's happening with Beck. Well, that's the thing I wrote back 20 years ago. Now there's another series of people that would be Bruno Mars, etc. I would say Justin Bieber, one of them. Beck, they think, is a beer anyway. They barely know Oasis, and that was my favorite group back then, and they were Grammy winners, Beck and Oasis. Well, why is that? Something's wrong. Well, actually, the first Grammy winner was my good friend, and we miss her dearly, Keely Smith. Top 40 used to offer a cross-section of music styles. If we had that today, you'd listen to some REM and then some Trisha Yearwood. This is when I wrote this. These days, you'd be listening to hip-hop and... what's his name? Little what? I love that guy. The DJ would explain that someone is in the Grand Ole Opry Hall of Fame, one of the country artists, and let's say I wrote in the book Trisha, I would explain that she was a backup singer for Garth Brooks, and a little bit of Hanson. They're 13-year-olds and their family. That at the time they were 13. This is all dated now. And here's the Pizzicato 5. There's actually 3 of them, and they're from Japan. It was a DJ's job to tell you all of that. Now you have to watch MTV, and you can't even watch that anymore. It's 40 years old, and people aren't watching that. And reading every teen magazine, you don't do that anymore. Which, incidentally, the biggest one author of the teen magazine was Rona Barrett, who also started Entertainment Tonight. That was her idea, that show. When I lived with Bob Marcucci in California, and he managed her, she had an idea that she wanted to put a tragedy show on television about dead artists, people who were killed. I think you'll find all of that on Reels TV now. It's, the thing with Natalie Wood. She wanted to do a whole show of that every time. There were a lot of those tragedies. Now they're on television. I think A&E Biography did some of it too. Anyway, that's TV. On the radio, we didn't do any of that stuff. Most of the FM shows come from the crotch. And even the music, the music used to sing about problems in the world. Now we have so many of them probably, or there's no CD about virus yet. Let's see. the AM shows up in the White House. And what was I saying here? Oh, most of the FM shows come to crotch, and the AM shows end up in the White House. And I'm trying to do mine in the living room for a cross-section of listeners. Trouble is, I'm not sure American houses are being built with living rooms anymore. See, this all has changed. You know, we used to have back porch, barbershops, family dinners. It's all changed now. So when I wrote this book, we were coming out of it, and now we're into a whole other phase. The result of our relentless catering to the demographics is separatism. And we're still suffering from that because the cell phone did a good job of separating us. We serve different age groups, give each of the age groups its own entertainment center so that sponsors can market their goods directly. The payback for that approach to entertainment is that we lack unity. So we can't even get together on anything. You know, I mean, we're more separated by Democrats and Republicans and religion and color and gender. Beginning of this target marketing craze was the decline of the Ed Sullivan format, which was variety. Back then, everybody sat in the living room waiting for the act he or she liked. You had to sit through everybody else's crap to get to your crap. Nowadays, nobody sits through anybody's crap. You have only your crap because we have no cost culture. It's very difficult for a heavy metal fan to sit through a country act, and it's a considerable challenge for somebody who likes a heavy metal act to watch a ballet. The marketers have decided to divide and conquer. They deliver entertainment to that person who is 15 years old and doesn't have to put up with the taste of somebody who is 50 anymore. As a result, teenagers have lost what little respect they may have had for seniors or to pay attention to us. We need to pay attention to them, too. We may even, what's even worse, the seniors have lost respect for children. We need another Ed Sullivan or Johnny Carson, somebody who can bridge the many comedians today who could. We don't have any of them who can pull it off anymore. Most comics today think the world owes them something. They're very self-centered, and they're one-dimensional. Their bravado really stems from fear. They're overcompensating. A person who acts in charge and has to be the center of attention at all times is actually a fearful person. Someone who's always afraid and on the defensive cannot be a kind professional person, and we lack that on the air right now. We don't have many generous comedic performers anymore. The personas of Lucille Ball, Red Skelton, Jackie Gleason, Sid Caesar, Robin Williams. We have some, I think Eddie Murphy's still that way, and we have a couple of comics who are that way. And some who are hanging on, like Jackie Mason is one of my favorites. You can't make me think for 1 minute that Jim Carrey is of their caliber and professionalism. I like his movies, and in his Living Color, the work was great, but he's not going to be the one to bridge the demographics. Now, that's the same with Jimmy Fallon and people on the late night television now. They're not bridging the demographics easily. Nowadays, we are looking for smartasses instead of brilliance. We're celebrating mediocrity. We encouraged brilliance before we nurtured it. We don't look for it now. Now we're just looking for a bang, or whomever can slap a label on market for a quick buck. Branding, we call it. Take Howard Stern. Howard was definitely established as a brand. He stands for a certain something. I refer to that as, in those days, as humiliation. Many refer to it as entertainment. If humiliating someone is entertaining, then he's entertaining. If being a smartass is humorous, then he's hysterical. Letterman and Howard Stern are both in the same cloth. You know, one is packaged prettily, the other one is coarse. But both of them use very adolescent humor and like to get their laughs by knocking people. It's a style. I'm not saying Howard can't be really funny. When he was at NBC, he was particularly creative, especially when he was doing Hitler's Bunker and the Grammy Award-winning coverage that he couldn't get into the Radio City Music Hall, so he had Al Rosen in a phone booth. He's got a fertile imagination. He's a good marketing guy, too. And he was guided by a lucky star. He didn't have any drug or alcohol problems, so you got to give him credit for that. And Howard also had good management with Don Buchwald and the guy who adopted him, who needed him as badly as Howard needed. They needed each other. Was Mel Karmazin, the owner of the stations, and he at one time brought him over to XM, Sirius XM. These days, most of the humor is based on waiting for Howard's guest to let down his guard so he can take the guy on, or the woman. It used to be that comedians got a laugh by taking a pie in the face. Today, comedians like Howard can't be funny unless they got someone they can throw the pie at. I was going to leave that. It's an adolescent approach. Sophomore, when I was younger. One day, the pie came right back and hit me in the face, literally. Here's what happened. I was at Billboard convention in the early 70s at the Plaza Hotel in New York. I was one of the most respected jocks in the country, won the Billboard Award 3 years in a row as the #1 jock in the country. I had a huge audience. Industry people listened to what I had to say because I knew how to get ratings, and when I played a record, it became a hit. One of the admirers of mine was a guy from the West Coast, Tom Donahue. He's the father of underground radio, which focused on long-playing songs and albums like the Grateful Dead, The Who. He's a San Francisco guy like Bill Graham with the West Coast connection, Jefferson Starship, etc. Until Donahue, nobody was playing albums. He started it on the West Coast. In New York, it was Murray the K and Roscoe on WOR-FM, and then, of course, WNEW-FM, which was Scott Muni. They didn't hype anything. There was none of this top 40 frantic delivery. They played these records all the way through, and interesting things about the artists. They were very relaxed. They attracted more discerning listeners, and they're casual, you know. Tom Donahue and his partner, Bobby Mitchell, had been top 40 DJs in San Francisco. They decided to steer away from the common hook records and toward the likes of Janis Joplin, Jimi Hendrix, and long play. And in doing that, we discovered the Doors and some of the other great groups. They had to change radio stations, so Tom and Bobby went on to program KSAN, which became an FM underground station. They called it underground because it was different. And today it's called alternative. We don't even have that so much now. Donahue and I met at this convention. We had nothing but respect for each other. He loved me because Wolfman loved me. They both were good friends. Even though we were doing totally different things, I was asked to speak at the convention, and when I got up, some guy pied me, and it wasn't a cheesecake. Well, Tom was pissed, you know. He came running up to protect me. He was a big guy, maybe 350 pounds and tall. He went over to the guy who pied me and said, "How dare you do this? Who do you think you are? You're an asshole. Now get out of my face." So he slammed him down. After that, I wanted to be more like Tom and less like the kind of guy who throws pies at people for cheap laughs. Now let's take Bob Hope. He was always brilliant. When I hosted Satellite Live, I did a 1 hour, I was the first satellite host in the country. It was every Sunday from LA. I did a 1 hour on the first anniversary, 1 hour broadcast from Bob's house at Christmas time. It was our anniversary, actually. 1 hour with Bob's writers, the next hour with Bob. I couldn't believe how sharp Bob was. He didn't need the writers. Later on, Bob was on Howard Stern's show, and Howard kept trying to find an in to find a way to get a laugh at Bob's expense, asking him about his sex life, etc. And it wasn't going anywhere, and Bob wasn't letting him in. Bob's no fool, you know. He knows how to defend himself. Obviously, Howard hadn't expected the old goat to be so sharp. On the show, it was frustrating for Howard because Bob kept a safe distance and was verbal. On the way out, in true Bob Hope fashion, he got the last laugh. Bob looked right into the camera and addressed the audience directly. And Bob said, "Is he a fag?" He just threw Howard right under the bus. You can't put Howard Stern in the same league as Bob Hope. Or me, or any of us, you know. What was Howard thinking? What was he smoking that day? Another example of this humiliation style of entertainment is what I call the mob mentality. A lot of entertainers assume that all Italian Americans are gangsters, and they think somehow that's funny. But as an Italian American, I can safely say we're not all from Sicily biting our hands and swearing at dwarfs, like Joe Pesci. He's not a dwarf. And Danny DeVito, he's a dwarf. No, he's not a dwarf. Robert De Niro, mother effed everybody to death, and so did Joe, and I love these guys. The Irishman was a big hit this year. It's funny, the fascination we have since The Godfather, Goodfellas, and all the Wise Guy shows on radio with my friend Cha-Cha did that, and Stevie Van Zandt. I don't think it's, all of it's not funny. I mean, we didn't live that way in my family. I don't think New York's Mayor Giuliani comes from that kind of family, but he acts it these days. He acts like a mobster. If African Americans don't want to see Amos and Andy, why would I want to see Casino? But I do want to see Casino. I correct my book. Nevertheless, I'm optimistic that we can find another Ed Sullivan or Johnny Carson, or someone who will be able to span the demographic spectrum. We just have to be willing to nurture the talent. And nurturing starts in our own homes. We're bypassing the whole process there too. You know, we give our kids their own lives, their own TV, their own cable, their own phones, their own video games, and their own everything. We give them the email, the credit cards. We're encouraging the separatism. We use this as babysitting tools, I think, at the beginning. The baby boomers are enjoying the bull market because we're giving the kids the things that we didn't have when we were young, you know. Giving money is taking the place of parenting. We just can't buy our kids a new video game every week and call that good parenting. What we should be spending on them is time. I said to my daughter recently, we never sit down and have meals together. You take your food to your room, your sister goes to her room, works at the computer while she eats, and I'm the fool in the kitchen. It's not my idea of any fun. I'm very uncomfortable about it. I'm fearful. Let's all make a plan to spend some time together. Where do you want to go? You got to go out to get together with them, you know. You got to go to Chick-fil-A. You got to phrase it right and not make it a command either. Say, I'd like to spend some time with you. Do you think we could go to go get something to eat? Are you hungry, my little precious? Or do you think it would be okay to put some time aside? It's all about courtesy, actually. Kids want to be treated the same as we do, and why shouldn't they? Why shouldn't they? At Thanksgiving this year, I had 16 people, everybody on cell phone, all looking at, texting each other across the table, I think, and looking at each other. And I said, allow me to introduce myself. I'm your father, you know, and respectively the grandfather and the friend of the family. I'm trying to reach one of my daughters, teach her the importance of keeping her word. The other day I said to her, you made a plan last night. I asked you at 2:30 in the morning, are you still up, when you had an appointment at the ranch for horseback riding at 9 a.m. You told me you'd go at 9, and here it is 10 o'clock, and you haven't gone yet. The ranch is calling, wondering where you are. I've made a living out of running off at the mouth, and if I've learned anything, it's how important it is to keep your word, especially to God. After all, God keeps his word to us. He made another day, and he provided everything here. He kept his word, now you got to keep yours. You keep your word to God by keeping it with everyone else. And if you're an atheist, your good sense tells you to keep your word. My daughter's intelligent and sensitive. She heard everything I said. Does that mean she'll do it? That she believes me? I don't know. Maybe. That's parenting. We'll learn from each other during this experience. In fact, she taught me something pretty important the other day. We were running late to church. And naturally, I got stuck at every stoplight. Fort Lauderdale, they have the longest stoplights in the history next to Las Vegas. They're 5 minutes long. I started cursing at the traffic lights, slapping the steering wheel. And Mercedes said to me, you know, Dad, no matter what you do, you can't change the lights, but you can change your attitude. She's right. All anybody needs his or her entire life around is a willingness to change attitudes. The millennium hoopla is a perfect excuse for us to change our attitudes. After a lot of things, they say millennium is a cleaning time for the planet. Subconsciously, we think we're going to wake up on January 1st and have new lives. Our culture has suffered a lot from bad habits long enough. It's time for recovery, and it's ripe for it. The recovery from alcohol, drugs, food, shopping, gambling, now internet. I think people finally, it's time to address our demons. Simply can't live with drug abuse or physical abuse or emotional abuse. You can't live separate without relationships. These things have to be worked on. We need to mend the separatism and strive for unity in our relationships with one another and with our higher power. I think that God has created, I'm a person of faith, I think God has created a wondrous mosaic, except for the flights at JetBlue, that's a mosaic. In it, God has placed each one of us. We are these little different colored stones, and every once in a while he lets us out of the mosaic to admire his work. He lets us see what he's created and where we are in it, and that's a privilege. I feel that in the rare times when I've been quiet and humble and willing to really listen, he's shown it to me. Praying is talking to God, listening is meditating is listening. Then I go back to my place in the mosaic and do my thing, which is to shine for him. So on music appreciation, I admit it, I don't like the Beatles. I didn't like them when they first came out, I do now. I didn't just resent their becoming more popular than DJs. I really thought She Loves You was a horrible record. And I was forced to play I Want to Hold Your Hand, and too many times too. Besides, I was into R&B, rhythm and blues, which is what I felt. The Beatles were ripping it off. I like the original R&B artists. I used to go see Otis Redding, James Brown, Chuck Berry. I didn't want to hear the Beatles doing their version. To me, they were like bad Chicago singers. We didn't need to have 4 guys from England with bad haircuts coming over here singing like Little Richard songs, you know. But I loved it all. I loved it all. I liked the fame, the fortune, and I loved the game. And the resentment for the Beatles certainly wore thin when I realized that John was very spiritual. I met Sid Bernstein, who brought them here, and he was one of my best friends. And we opened up the strawberry fields with Yoko Ono, as a matter of fact. We did that. It was a great day. David Bernstein was the program director that hired me, was there, and we all loved John. Right across the street from the Dakota where he was shot, you know. It seems that we killed all the good people. We killed John Kennedy, my favorites anyway, you know, Martin Luther King, John Lennon, and others. As I got older, I started to look beyond my resentments, and today, looking back, what astounds me is the Beatles, who were probably abusing drugs and alcohol as much as I was, wrote the most wonderful spiritual songs. All You Need Is Love, Eleanor Rigby, Hey Julie, John Lennon's Give Peace a Chance, and of course, George Harrison. I Really Want to Know You, My Sweet Lord. You go through all their records and you won't find Paul is dead. You'll find that God is alive. So that's chapter 7. We're going to do chapter 8, and I think that's the final one for the Joey Reynolds Let It Smile Be Your Umbrella book. One more chapter, and then we're up to the 20th anniversary celebration of Let It Smile Be Your Umbrella. You can get this downloaded on what you probably have already. You're maybe watching my podcast or listening to it. And you can download also on the Facebook, YouTube. Sign up, join my little team here, the Joey Reynolds Army, the Joey Reynolds Associates here. It's great to have you in my life, and it's a wonderful challenge to be able to have a book about yourself and correct it. I don't know very many people. I wonder if Shakespeare could sit there and correct his writings. This is it. That's the adventure, but also it's the pleasure of this generation that we're able to have all these electronics and make good what we did wrong. It's a Reynolds Rap.